Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's discussion. This week, we'll be talking about ethics and accessibility in video game design. Um, a lot of games, a lot of modern games over the past 10 years or so has really gotten pushed to the forefront. These games are being made with these ideas in mind, trying to be socially conscious of the content and representation of peoples, cultures, topics, and as well as keeping the ability for everyone, no matter their physical or um, mental ability, to be able to enjoy the games that they are producing. So we're going to take a look at kind of um, the importance of these things in game design, as well as how um, we can look for where these things are done with quality and with care, uh, as opposed to checking boxes off a list. So let's talk about the importance of accessibility. So there are 400 million gamers with disabilities worldwide. Um, there are billions of gamers, and gaming is the I believe still the most the largest industry of entertainment in the world. Um, and there is a significant portion of the gaming community that has one or more disabilities that may prevent them from playing games like normal like um, was originally intended by uh, the manufacturers of the hardware. Um, 70% want more of options. So these gamers want more accessibility features in their games, whether it's things like color blindness correction or um, magnification in UI, or all the way to physical controllers, which I'll talk a little bit about the controller you see in the photo here in a couple slides. Um, there is a need for or a desire for these accessibility options to be made available in mainstream gaming. Um, over over the course of the inclusion of accessibility options in games, there is potential for a 25% revenue growth. So, gaming companies who are looking to um, expand their profit base, they're going to want to appeal to these gamers as well. They don't want to um, ignore accessibility as a thing that's too difficult to implement or not worth it from a financial side, because it is also very profitable for them to do it. But that's not the only reason why accessibility is important to these game companies. Um, it's not just a bottom line. It's not just a look for the company visually on social media or in the public eye. It's also the desire to capture that 400 million um, number of gamers who would like these accessibility options to be present in the games. So next up, let's talk about the ethical challenges in game design. I've split this up into four different topics, four different categories of ethics, and they are representation, monetization, psychological impact, and social responsibility. Um, Representation might be the one that we um, immediately jump to when we think about ethics in video games. Representation means telling stories and representing peoples of diverse backgrounds, um, representing real, uh, like deep characters in these backgrounds, representing women in more authentic ways, so on and so forth. And this is something that is a very hot button topic in ethics and game design, and has been for a while now. And the barometer is shifting a bit, into or shifting quite a bit over the past couple of decades to be more diverse and accepting, and not just kind of that like more or less one-dimensional power fantasy over sexualization of women, things that you see in a lot of early video games. And now we get more nuance and more depth to these stories, these characters. So representation is very important, and we don't want to create caricatures. We don't want to be reductive in the way that these groups are represented in gaming, um, because it is reductive and it's against, um, I guess, socially progressive norms, and that's something that we want to um, be mindful of. You know, we don't want to overly sexualize women without personalities. We don't want to be racially or culturally insensitive to groups of people, things like that. Next up is monetization. So this is actually a kind of completely different spectrum from the other. Well, at least from representation. There's been a big fight over the past 10, 15 years or so. Actually, probably about 10 years, because I think Overwatch was the big catalyst for it. Of kind of the what is ethically and um, socially acceptable for a monetization method for a video game. The difference between fair pricing and uh, buyer conscious um, models versus exploitative mechanics. So the big catalyst for this has been loot boxes, and I think Overwatch, Fortnite was a bit of a problem there, and similar games that had large. Their monetization was built around these loot boxes, and whether or not those loot boxes were considered gambling. And a lot of governments around the world, especially the EU, I believe, parts of Eastern Asia. I don't remember everywhere that I don't know everywhere that that's completely banned, but a lot of these places are creating these laws, these structures around this monetization, because loot boxes can be viewed as gambling. Um, so when looking at the monetization methods of a lot of modern games, we have to look at how much does the game cost, how much does additional content cost, how much of that content is required to fully um, access all of the content in the game. So, for instance, if we had a game where it was a live service game or whatever, but the actual ending to the game itself, the storyline or whatever, was held behind the battle pass that you then had to buy to be able to access that content, that can be seen as more exploitative than actually releasing an entire game in one go. Uh, I can think of a good example of this in being something like Destiny, where a lot of story content between uh, expansions for Destiny were. I say were because I don't know they changed their monetization method, but um, uh, kind of gated behind battle passes or content packs and things like that. Different raids specifically. I think it was the final shape, the most recent expansion, had the actual final boss of the entire story of Destiny up to that point locked behind a raid. And I don't actually know if this is true because I haven't played Destiny since the final shape came out. Um, a lot of times Destiny locks raids behind DLC, so you have to buy the raid to be able to access it, or buy a key to be able to access all the dungeons and things. And I don't actually know if that one was included in the game or not. But the expectation from a consumer standpoint is that you buy a game and you have access to all of the content in that game, and things aren't gated by um, additional in-game purchases. Things that assist in gameplay are different from things that are required for gameplay. Um, and there's kind of a fine line there of what is considered like a tool versus what is considered content. Um, so that is important to keep in mind. You want to make sure that we are looking at fair monetization methods and call out the ones that are overly exploitative. Next up, we have psychological impact. So um, there's a big discussion about the uh, uh, addiction to gaming, and this can lead a little bit into or bleed a little bit into monetization because of the mechanics behind addiction. So game mechanics, game design that really focuses on whether it's that gambling aspect or repetitive play. Back in the day, World of Warcraft was the game that obsessive play patterns really. I was addicted to World of Warcraft for 4 years during it's the height of the game, and it's something that like you see you see play times balloon from hour or two a day to 13, 14 plus hours of gameplay for people, and it adversely affected people's mental health and physical health, and can do that depending on the um, the content of the game. So we want to analyze kind of the play patterns, the monetization, and the expectation of gameplay to see whether or not those mechanics do create a psychological impact on the player. And then finally, we have social responsibility. This is kind of an umbrella term to um, how much responsibility does a video game have in sorry, my mic. How much responsibility does a video game have in um, upholding itself to the previous ethical considerations? Um, and as a form of media, video games as a form of art need to be held at a certain um, standard for these ethical issues. Um, and these get looked at with a very fine tooth comb. Anytime something gets called into question about, the monetization, the psychological impact, representation, diversity, inclusion, and things like that. Anytime that gets called out in a game, it's something that people really kind of dig deep into, and it depends on the cultural impact of the game itself. It depends on the reach of the game, I think. The more that a game, the more of an audience that a game reaches, the more lives it can affect. And that's when people need to be cognizant of this social responsibility. All right, so next up, we're going to talk a little bit about these design principles, both for accessibility and for ethics in gaming. Um, and I'm kind of going to split it up. So we're going to talk accessibility first, touch on ethics, and then kind of bring it together at the end. So, when talking accessibility, there are a lot of features that games can have that promote good options for people who may need them in order to enjoy the game. Um, you have things like flexible user interfaces where you can resize text, change the contrast, change the color, customize the layout, whatever is needed to visually be acceptable for the player. Controller remapping, which is a very common thing and has been for many, many years, but is something that needs to be consistently looked at over during game design. Sorry, I wanted to grab my Xbox controller for visual representation here. But being able to customize the inputs, location sensitivity, and whatnot for game controllers, for keyboard and mouse, for fight sticks, dance pads, any kind of control interface is important to make sure that these games can be controlled properly by those who may have a need for a different map. One of the cool things, I think, because I pulled this one out, this is actually a Pro controller, an Xbox Pro controller. Besides the, see if I can get this in the camera, besides the ability for things like you can change the thumbsticks, or you can change the D-pad and whatnot, you have access to, on the back of the controller, sensitivity options right there, sensitivity options for the triggers and things. So the tighter the sensitivity, the more you have to press the trigger, the harder you have to press it to get an input. And simple things like that can make the world difference for people who may have issues with motor function in their hands, issues with grip strength, things like that, that give them access to gameplay, to enjoyable gameplay. Next up is auditory alternatives. So for those who have issues with hearing or audio perception, having subtitles, visual cues, haptic feedback, rumble is a good example of that. Flashes and visual effects in games when you're getting hit from one side or there's a sound coming from one side. Actually, Fortnite, I think, has one of the best examples of auditory visual cues. And I assume that at this point everyone uses them for the actual advantage that it gives you in the game for being able to see where things are coming from. But it is very good in the way that it shows you the direction, the intensity, the type of audio that is coming from different parts of the game world from the position of your character. And of course, subtitles. Actually having subtitles, I don't have auditory issues, and especially with gaming, it's not something that I am too worried about. But I, by default, use subtitles because I find that it's often easier to follow what's happening by being able to see the subtitles. So that's something that's kind of leaked into the mainstream and not just a accessibility thing, and it's very very important to have those things in your games. And then finally, there's cognitive considerations. The ability for those to process the information that is being given to them, whether this is a difficulty slider, whether this is clear tutorials, practice areas, things like that, to be able to fully grasp everything that's going on. Difficulty is a huge one. It's a huge discussion right now because how accessible do people want games that are known for their difficulty, like Dark Souls, Elden Ring, things like that? Should those games have a easier mode available because of accessibility? And it's a debate that's happening because part of the art form of a game like Elden Ring is its difficulty. So this is something to keep in mind when you're considering how these representations of cognitive function are being handled in video game design. So we can talk a little bit about some case studies, some really good representations of accessibility in game game design and hardware design, because I'm going to talk about the Xbox Adaptive Controller. I feel like every single week I talk about The Last of Us, but it's a good example for a lot of things that we talk about in the class, and a huge one is their accessibility options. There are tons of changes you can make to the scale of each of the UI elements, color, contrast, different gamma settings, and highlights for different interactable things in the world. You have text to speech, you have auto aim, other combat assistance modes. difficulty sliders and things like that, all set to completely customize the experience for the player as is necessary for that player to experience the game successfully, like the way that the designers want you to. Um, really, The Last of Us is a kind of a landmark. Like this is what we should be kind of striving for in accessibility options in games. Um, let's talk about the adaptive controller. So this thing is really cool. Sony also has one, and I'm going to pause this real fast because I want to pull up a spec sheet. There we go. Okay, so the Xbox adaptive controller is, and this is straight from Xbox's webpage, but basically it's a fully customizable platform for game control that can be expanded upon no matter what accessibility issue or physical motor issue that a person would have. Um, by its base design, it has overly large buttons and D-pad available to be able to not have to worry about dexterity, finger dexterity to be able to hit buttons. As fully plug-in or customizable plugins for all the different control outputs that can then be added to different devices um, from like a Wii style nunchuck controller to buttons, and these are really cool. These little switches that are great, and also we actually Dogwood actually did work with the Cerebral Palsy Foundation for some of this technology, eye tracking technology, which is awesome. Which basically allows you to control a game with your eyes. We were creating we created a game for the Cerebral Palsy Foundation. And actually, it's kind of a little bit of a plug. If you check out the OER open educational resource unit that Professor Martino put out a couple months ago, that is an entire step-by-step guide on how to create the game that we made for the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, where we actually did input or create inputs for eye tracking movement for an Infinite Runner game. So there's some really cool stuff that can be done with this. You have access to all sorts of inputs and things, different controller setups, the quad stick for quadriplegic uh, gaming inputs, joysticks, foot pedals, all sorts of stuff, which is really cool. And also very important to be able to allow people who are traditionally unable to play games to be able to play games. There's also I want to pull up the Sony one real fast to compare, but I'm not going to talk about that one too much. Be right back. There we go. This is Sony's, which is all of the functionality of a DualSense controller in kind of a customizable. They do kind of like this wheel look to it, where the buttons are larger. They're interchangeable. You can change sensitivity, distance. The joystick is larger, easier to access. So on and so forth. It also has all of the customization plugs and everything that the Xbox One does, but I think less customization than Xbox's. This is the one that I've actually worked with or played around with hands-on at a I think it was at GDC. Maybe it was some industry convention that I went to, where I got to play with this thing. It's really cool. The things that people are doing in accessibility options for gaming are really cool. More recently, I think people may have heard about the guy who was able to play, I think it's Age of Empires in with a Neuralink with the or it was Age of Empires League of Legends with the brain chip that the SpaceX or whoever, one of Elon Musk's companies, was developing. That was a really interesting use case for kind of neural interfaces for gaming. There's a lot of really cool products that are being developed to help with accessibility in gaming. So that's awesome. Anyway, so these are that's a big one. And then finally, similarly to The Last of Us, Celeste has been kind of applauded for its for its customization in accessibility modes with its assist mode, which is allows you to kind of toggle a lot of different things to get the correct difficulty and gameplay experience that you'd want without having to worry about your anyone's cognitive inequalities to be able to play the game. All right, have to reset the video. Be right back. And as we discussed with the Xbox and PlayStation controllers, the ability for technological solutions to um, assist in accessibility in video games is kind of growing exponentially as the technology scale is increasing. The use cases for that technology in gaming is becoming very apparent. We talked about adaptive hardware with the controllers. You also have cloud gaming. Not necessarily something that people not necessarily something that has been done to a large enough scale to be successful. Google Stadia didn't do very well, failed, and other cloud gaming methods through Sony's cloud gaming platform, Xbox Live or Game Pass rather, or the Steam Deck, things like that. Cloud gaming is becoming more of a possibility. The thing about cloud gaming is that it will reduce kind of the barrier to entry for those who can't afford um, powerful hardware to be able to play games, being able to basically process um, all of the requirements, all of the actual gameplay processes on a cloud server and stream that to a player um, is something that will open up a lot of opportunities for people who can't afford, a great super powerful gaming PC or even like a PlayStation 5 of things. It gives you access to those things at a lower cost, which is great. And then there's AI assistance. This is something that I think is not been implemented well yet, but maybe in the future the use of machine learning to create these systems that allow adaptive gameplay for player needs. There's some interesting thought experiments going on there, and then immersive technologies like VR and AR. VR is a platform that is uh, kind of, I think, of a bit more apparent as to what can be done for helping those with disabilities interacting in gaming worlds. VR headsets allow full immersion into kind of a 3D space. They give a bit more or a bit less of a barrier for motor control, motor function, and dexterity to operate the controllers, operate the gameplay experience. And then AR is something that is accessible to people without the need for super expensive hardware, using it off of phones or cell phones, mobile devices, tablets, lower end VR headsets, and things like that. There's a lot of possibilities there. And there's some very interesting advancements happening in the space of VR and AR with things like the Meta, or not the Meta Quest 3 is really nice, but not the Meta Quest. I'm thinking the Apple VR headset, which I can't remember the name of now. There's some really interesting AR technologies happening in that headset that can be used for some really interesting accessibility use cases, which I think is pretty cool. So that's the accessibility side of things, and now we can talk about the things that game designers can do for keeping ethics in mind when developing games. Uh, so a lot of game companies have guidelines for accessibility standards, for ethical standards, things that the team needs to be aware of from the project start. Establishing those things is very important from the beginning, so everyone has the expectation of what they or the understanding of the expectation for what they need to be developing, be aware of while developing. Whether it's, we're going to have all these accessibility functions, we're going to have to be aware of color palettes for color blindness, or we're going to have to be aware of um, epilepsy triggers or things like that. These are things that we need to be mindful of. We also need to be mindful of characters that we're developing being uh, ethically sourced and um, fleshed out in ways that are not we don't want to create caricatures, things like that. um, Involving diverse testers, this can be important when testing out for accessibility. If you involve testers with disabilities to be able to test those options and see if they work, see what the issues that they have are, and try to address them, that's good. If you have testers of different ethnic or cultural backgrounds, be able to tell you whether or not a game, a design in the game is ethically sensitive, things like that. Actually, there is. Oh, geez, I feel really bad because I don't remember the name of the organization, but there is an organization that does a lot of work specifically in the representation of people of color in gaming, and they do a lot of testing, like contracting work for testing games to specifically um, help enhance the voices of people of color in game design. So organizations like that are fantastic, do great work, and are very important to the testing process to make sure that we keep these considerations in mind. You have to evaluate your trade-offs. So balancing your commercial um, expectations, the artistic integrity, the considerations for accessibility and for different inclusion metrics that you're trying to make sure that you adhere to. You need to evaluate at what point do things become kind of off balance and need to be brought to balance. And then being committed to improvement, which is something I think a lot of games in general tend to fall off of once a game is released, whether or not they are committed to improving upon their the feedback that they get. So I wish I had a good example of this outside of a live service game, because a lot of World of Warcraft did a really good job of this about 10 years ago when they started adding a lot more accessibility options to the game, which is something that they've received feedback from for years. And the rise of um, gamers with accessibility issues playing World of Warcraft, they were like, okay, well, let's add things to the game to make this more accessible to those players. Partially because they wanted to capitalize on that player base, but also because they received the feedback from the community telling them, hey, this would be a good idea to add. And companies need to be aware of that after a game is released. We live in a post-digital world where games are not um, 100% beholden to what is on the physical hardware or the physical media for the game. There's no disc, there's no cartridge, and we are not required to produce on those media. So um, the ability to change and improve upon things post launch is a lot easier now than it was 20 years ago. And I believe is that yeah, that's our last slide. Um, so overall, we want to make sure that our games performing these functions of accessibility considerations, ethical considerations, social, psychological, um, monetization, whether these things are being done genuinely, authentically, or whether these things are kind of showboating for a corporate bottom line or whatever. Things that we need to be aware of that we can look at and analyze through the gameplay, through the critique of the game. So keep that in mind when you're looking at things. Again, like I said, I'm gonna go back a couple here. Hold up, that was a skip slide. Don't worry about that one. Uh, look at games that have a lot of very inclusive accessibility options, like The Last of Us, um, that allow for customization in the gameplay experience, like Celeste. Things like that. Those are good examples of accessibility. Those are good examples of ethical considerations. Things with non-predatory monetization structures are great for accessibility or for ethical reasons. And then also, when we talk about the solutions to technology, things that lower the barrier to entry for people to enjoy the game. It's kind of the big takeaway here. Um, that being said, give me 1 second. There we go. So I just pulled up the module section of the course space and canvas. For this week, we have I have a bunch of additional videos to look at. Um, Things talking about. Oh, I didn't really want to open this up in new tabs. Things to talk about the inclusivity of mechanics and UI and game design, best practices for mobility considerations. But these videos are good uh, discussions and presentations of the topics that we're talking about. Feel free to look at these um, in your own time. It's something that I think it would be very helpful to you. Um, they are a little long. This one's 25 minutes, and then this one is 45 minutes. So they are a little long. So use them as you will. And then finally, I have already added the discussions. So I've added a discussion for last week's section, of which on online gaming and live services, which I did not actually update or submit a lecture for. So this is available for you to submit a discussion for. I will not be. I've set a due date for this weekend or for Sunday. I would not be taking points off if you submit this one late. I just wanted to get people to know that they should submit something so that we can have that discussion start. Because I will go back and try to do the lecture from last week that I missed. So thank you, everybody. Apologies for the confusion. Next week, we'll be talking about modding in games and the ways that we can improve player experiences through modding. And then the final project itself is available for look for starting now. I would start it because it's going to be rather quickly coming up. But basically, we're looking at 2,500 word analysis of a game of your choice using all of the stuff that we've talked about during this course. So get started on that. And again, that'll be due the last week or the last day of class and no later. So make sure you don't submit that one late. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.